I said get back! Do it now! Do it now! Put your hands behind your head!
Rain hissed against the windshield like static. Marcus Langston stood still on the soaked pavement, hands raised, breath fogging the night air. The cruiser's red and blue strobes flickered across his face, cutting his silhouette into shards. Officer Reed stepped out slow, tapping his flashlight against his palm, jaw tight, eyes scanning Marcus as if he were a threat carved out of the darkness. "On your knees," Reed barked. His voice had the metallic ring of authority, polished by years of never being questioned. Marcus wore a pressed navy suit, soaked now, collar sticking to his neck. He had just left the Pentagon. A leather ID badge still hung around his chest. "I haven't done anything," Marcus said, voice low but steady. His pulse thudded at the base of his skull. Reed's flashlight jerked upward, blinding him. "I said on your knees." A woman's phone camera clicked from the sidewalk. Someone whispered, "He's in uniform." A small crowd had formed, drawn by the spectacle. Reed's smirk was thin, practiced. "Doesn't matter who you think you are." The words cut through the night like a blade. Marcus clenched his jaw, feeling the cold concrete under his knees, the taste of rain in his mouth. He thought of the medals in his drawer, the folded flag in his father's study. None of it mattered, now not against a badge aimed like a gun, behind Reed. Another cruiser screeched to a stop. The second officer stepped out. His face went pale the instant his eyes met Marcus's ID badge. Everything froze. Then, Reed's hand reached for his gun. The air cracked. Rain flattened everything into shades of gray. Sirens wailed in the distance, muffled by the downpour. Marcus Langston kept his hands high, palms open, the water running down his sleeves like veins of glass. Officer Reed circled him slowly, flashlight beam carving thin white lines through the rain. "License and registration," Reed said. "Not a request, a balk, a claim." Marcus's voice was calm. I wasn't driving. You were standing near the car." "It's my car." Reed leaned closer, breath hot through the rain. "Then, get on your knees." Marcus felt the shift in the air, the kind you only feel in combat zones, or when something irreversible is about to happen. The world tightened around one bad decision. From the sidewalk, a woman's voice cut through the hiss of rain. "He's not doing anything." Reed didn't turn. "Ma'am, back away." Her phone was already up. The screen glowed like a witness. Others gathered, 3, then 5. Umbrellas popped open like shields. Marcus's badge chain clinked softly against his soaked suit. Reed squinted at it, but didn't process what he saw. "You think flashing something shiny makes you different." Marcus lowered his hands slowly, deliberately, pulling the ID forward. The rain blurred the gold insignia, but the lettering was clear. U.S. Army. 4 stars. Reed didn't read it, or didn't care. "On your knees." The second officer arrived. She stepped out fast, boots splashing. One look at the badge and her pupils flared. "Reed," she hissed. Reed's hand twitched toward his holster. "Stay out of this. Do you know who don't?" His voice was a blade. "Nobody's above the law." Marcus exhaled through his nose. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. He'd seen that look before in war zones, checkpoints, riot lines. The look of someone who wants to make a point, not keep peace. He lowered to his knees. Cold water soaked through his trousers instantly. The crowd murmured like a rising tide. Ramirez's radio crackled. "Unit 12, status check." Reed barked. "Suspect detained." Marcus's wrists were yanked back. Steel cuffs clicked shut. The woman filming gasped. "Oh my God." Ramirez stepped closer. "Reed, stop." I said. "He's under arrest." "For what?" Marcus finally said. His voice was quiet. It hit like stone against glass. Reed smirked. "For reminding me how this country really works." The words slid out cold, practiced, not shouted, whispered, a truth with teeth. The cuffs bit into Marcus's skin. The rain grew heavier. The light from the cruiser spun across the street like a warning flare. Ramirez whispered, "Jesus Christ." Reed said nothing. The last thing Marcus saw before being shoved into the cruiser was his ID badge lying face down in a puddle. The gold edges caught a fragment of red and blue light, then vanished under the rain. The holding cell smelled of damp concrete and bleach. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, buzzing like a dying insect. The sound crawled into Marcus's skull and stayed there. Reed leaned against the opposite wall outside the bars, arms folded, voice soaked in mock tom. "Long night, huh?" His smirk never reached his eyes. It wasn't amusement. It was control. Marcus sat on the steel bench, hands resting on his knees. The soaked suit had dried unevenly, leaving dark patches across the fabric. His wrists were ringed red where the cuffs had dug in. Reed tapped his pen against a clipboard. Funny thing, you people always get loud when it's their fault. Marcus didn't respond. Reed tilted his head. Not talking. That's fine. Silence looks good on you. Another officer walked by, older, tired. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at Reed. Just kept moving. Institutional choreography. Everyone knew the steps. Ramirez appeared near the end of the hallway, jaw tight, radio clipped to her vest. She hesitated before approaching. Reed saw her coming and straightened. You should have let him go, Ramirez said under her breath. Reed snorted. You kidding me? Guy was standing there like he owned the damn street. He does own more than the street. Reed's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? You'll find out, she said. Reed stepped closer to the bars, staring down at Marcus. You think a fancy suit and some badge in your wallet changes what I see when I look at you? Marcus's gaze lifted slowly. No, the single syllable landed like a punch. Reed's smile faltered for half a second. He covered it with a laugh. Good, at least you know your place. The door at the end of the hall opened. A young recruit, barely 20, walked in, clutching a stack of intake files. His hands trembled slightly. His name tag read Dawson. He passed the file to Ramirez, eyes darting nervously toward Marcus. Ramirez spoke low, firm. This is a bad idea. You should process him properly. Reed ignored her. I've been doing this for 15 years. Don't teach me my job. Dawson shifted on his feet. Sir, he hasn't. There's no actual charge listed. Reed turned like a whip. What did you say? The boy's throat bobbed. It's just, there's no probable cause documented. Reed stepped into Dawson's space. You new here? Yes, sir. Then you'll learn how we do things. The light above them buzzed louder. Marcus sat perfectly still. He'd learned long ago that sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's a mirror. It shows the rot better than any protest. Dawson swallowed and moved back, clutching the files tight. Ramirez slammed her pen onto the desk. I'm not signing off on this. Reed's voice dropped low. Then, you're off the shift. You can't. Watch me. The hallway went quiet except for the buzz of the light and the steady drip of a leaky pipe in the corner. Marcus's breathing slowed. Each sound etched itself into him like a permanent file. Reed crouched in front of the cell, face level with Marcus. You'll sit here, maybe all night, maybe longer. No one's coming for you. Marcus met his eyes. No fear. Just wait. You're wrong. Reed leaned closer. Am I? Behind him, the phone on the duty desk rang. Ramirez picked it up. Her face shifted as she listened, posture stiffening like a soldier at parade rest. Reed didn't notice. He was still watching Marcus, waiting for a crack that wouldn't come. She hung up slowly. Reed. He ignored her. Reed. He turned, annoyed. What? Her voice was flat. Pentagons on the line. For the first time that night, Reed blinked. Ramirez handed him the receiver. He hesitated, then took it as he raised it to his ear. Marcus let the silence sit like a loaded chamber. The sound of Reed's forced yes, sir, filled the hallway. The light flickered. Again. The drip kept falling. The power began to tilt. The first clip hit Twitter at 3:17 a.m. A 30-second vid, rain-streaked but sharp enough to burn through time. Reed's voice cut through the static. On your knees. The camera caught Marcus's face as the cuffs snapped. Within an hour, the video was everywhere. News banners rolled. Talk shows picked it up before dawn. Hashtags bloomed like oil slicks. Hashtag racist stop. Hashtag General Langston. Hashtag on your knees. Inside the holding cell, Marcus sat with his elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He could hear the shift outside, urgent steps, ringing phones, murmurs behind glass. It wasn't quiet anymore. It was panic. Ramirez appeared first, her expression taut. You're trending globally, she muttered. You're not just a suspect anymore. You're a headline. Reed stalked down the hall a beat later. He carried himself the same chin up, swagger intact, but his eyes flicked toward Marcus with something new under the surface. Not fear, not yet, but instability. He barked at the desk sergeant. Mute the TV. The sergeant didn't move. Reed slammed his palm on the counter. I said mute it, but the TV kept running. A reporter's voice sliced the air. Identified as Marcus Langston, a decorated 4-star general and one of the most senior black officers in U.S. military history. Silence swallowed the hallway. Reed's jaw locked. Marcus's gaze didn't shift. He'd spent decades learning not to flinch in rooms like this. Ramirez leaned on the desk, voice low. You screwed the wrong person, Reed. He shot her a glare. I don't care who he is. She stepped closer. Yes, you do. Because this time, people are watching. Dawson entered, clutching a tablet, face pale. Sir, news networks. They're outside cameras, Pentagon's issuing statements. It's everywhere. Reed grabbed the tablet, scrolled, then threw it on the desk. This is just noise. It'll blow over. They always scream racism. Marcus's voice cut in, for the first time. Calm, precise. Not this time. Reed spun toward him. What? You wanted silence, Marcus said. But silence doesn't belong to you. The room stilled. A notification tone broke the silence. Ramirez's radio crackled. Be advised, we've got media vans, legal reps, inbound, and federal observers on site. Clear the entrance. Dawson stared at Reed like he was seeing him for the first time. Reed straightened his vest. You all think I'll go down for doing my job. Ramirez didn't blink. You didn't do your job. You made an example. That's the same thing. Her voice sharpened. No, it's the reason we're burning right now. Outside the cell, phones kept ringing. Reporters shouted through the rain. The walls of the precinct, once soundproof with complacency, were now transparent. Marcus leaned back on the cold bench. The air felt different, charged, dangerous. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply breathed. This wasn't victory. This was exposure. Reed's radio buzzed again. Command wants everyone in the briefing room. Now, the sergeant spoke softly. You better lawyer up. Reed adjusted his belt, squared his shoulders. I don't need a lawyer. I didn't do anything wrong. But his hands twitched. The first fracture. As the officers filed out, Marcus was left alone in the cell, the noise bleeding in through the cracks of a system that had always believed itself untouchable. He looked down at the faint red marks on his wrists. The world was watching, and Reed couldn't mute it anymore. Reed entered the briefing room stiff-backed but rattled. The place was swarming with people who outranked him: city officials, legal advisors, uniformed brass, and 3 unfamiliar men in dark suits who didn't smile. Ramirez was already there, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Officer Reed, the captain began, voice hard. Do you have any idea who you arrested tonight? Reed forced a shrug. Some guy, mouthing off. The captain slammed a folder on the table. That guy is General Marcus Langston, 4-star Pentagon, decorated combat commander. Do you understand the scale of what you've done? The words landed like a gunshot. Reed's throat tightened, but he masked it with a smirk. Nobody's above the law. One of the men in suits leaned forward. Then, explain the absence of probable cause in your arrest report. Reed's jaw ticked. He was suspicious. Suspicious of what? Reed opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The silence stretched long enough for everyone in the room to feel it. Another man in a dark suit placed a crisp folder on the table. This isn't just a PR nightmare. You detained a senior military officer without charge. You're looking at federal implications, civil rights violations, departmental collapse. Reed shot a look at Ramirez. She didn't flinch. I told you to stop, she said. The captain turned to her. You witnessed everything. Yes, I objected. He ignored me. The room shifted like gravity had changed. Red suddenly looked small, still dangerous but cornered. Effective immediately, the captain said, You're suspended. Badge and weapon surrendered. IA will investigate. Legal counsel's waiting. Reed's laugh came out sharp and bitter. This is insane. He's playing the race card and you're all folding. One of the suit's calm measured replied. He didn't say a word. The camera did. Ramirez stepped forward, voice firm. He didn't need to play anything. Reed, you handed it to him. Reed pointed at Marcus's image on the projected screen. He's a general. If he didn't want trouble, he could have said something, showed his badge. He, the captain, cut him off. He did. Reed froze. Ramirez's voice was cold. You just didn't care. Meanwhile, in the holding area, Marcus sat upright as 2 Pentagon officials entered the hallway. Their polished shoes echoed off the floor. One of them unlocked the cell, his voice controlled but heavy. General Langston, sir, we're here to bring you out. Marcus stood slowly. His cuffs had been removed hours ago, but the marks remained thin. Silent evidence. Not yet, Marcus said. The official frowned. Sir, we need to get you back to Washington. I'm not leaving this building through the back door, Marcus said. He humiliated me in public. I'll walk out the same way I came in. The official hesitated. There will be press. I know. Ramirez appeared behind them, clearing her throat. "General, I'll escort you." Reed was brought out at the same time, stripped of badge and sidearm, wrists behind his back. The irony didn't go unnoticed. Cameras crowded the entrance, flashing like artillery fire. Reed kept his chin up. "This isn't over." Marcus's eyes locked on him. It already started. The crowd roared when Marcus stepped out. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved forward, red lights blinking. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence had become the loudest voice in the city. Inside the station, Reed's last words before being led to an interview room came through clenched teeth. "He's not better than me." Ramirez's reply was flat. "No, but you thought you were better than him." For the first time, Reed had nothing left to say. The press room overflowed. Bright white lights blazed down like interrogation lamps. Dozens of reporters packed shoulder to shoulder behind metal barricades. Cameras hummed. Tripods creaked. Outside the windows, the rain had stopped, but the tension clung to the air like static. Marcus Langston stood behind the podium. His uniform was immaculate dark navy, medals aligned like razor edges, for silver stars gleaming on each shoulder. A silent wall of Pentagon officials flanked him. The noise in the room dimmed to a low electric buzz when he adjusted the microphone. "I did not call this press conference to defend my name," Marcus began. His voice carried without strain. Every syllable landed clean. "I called it because this isn't about me." A wave of camera shutters clicked behind him. A projector displayed a still frame. Reed, flashlight raised, Marcus on his knees, rain cutting across the scene. On October 17th, Marcus continued, "I was unlawfully detained by an officer who saw my skin before he saw my humanity. I followed every command. I carried identification. I wore a uniform of service, and none of it mattered." Murmurs rolled through the crowd. A reporter called out, "General Langston, do you believe this was racially motivated?" Marcus met her gaze. "Belief isn't required. It was recorded." Another voice shouted, "Are you seeking personal charges?" Marcus's hands rested lightly on the podium. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about truth. It's about what happens when authority becomes a mirror of bias instead of justice." At the back of the room, Ramirez watched in silence, hands in her pockets. She'd spent the morning watching Reed's union issue statements, lawyers framing the incident as misunderstanding, pundits spinning narratives. But here this room felt different. It wasn't chaos. It was control. A third reporter shouted, "What do you want to say to Officer Reed?" Marcus didn't blink. "I don't speak to power that hides behind a badge." The room erupted in questions. Flashes strobed. The captain from the precinct shifted uncomfortably in the corner. Ramirez noticed. Reed's name wasn't just his anymore. It was now a symbol, a fault line splitting the city. Marcus raised a hand. The room went quiet. "You'll ask about me," he said, voice low and hard. "But I'm not the first. This story started long before I stepped into that rain. It started every time someone was told to kneel for existing." His words hit like hammer strikes. From the corner of the room, a cable news anchor whispered to her producer, "That's the headline." A Pentagon official leaned forward. "General, we can wrap this up." Marcus ignored him. "I will continue to serve this country, but I will not serve its silence." That last line cut the air clean. He stepped away from the podium, leaving reporters shouting behind him. He didn't turn back. Outside, the street was lined with more cameras, crowds holding signs, some in support, some spitting rage. Reed's union had already released a statement framing the arrest as procedural error. Cable news networks were looping the footage in slow motion, dissecting every breath, every gesture, every fraction of a second. Ramirez caught up to him by the side entrance. "That was a war speech." Marcus buttoned his jacket. "No, war has rules." She studied him. "You know this is going to explode." "It already has." A black SUV idled at the curb. Pentagon escorts stood by. Marcus paused before getting in. "You ever notice," he said, eyes fixed on the crowd, "the world doesn't shake until someone refuses to whisper." Ramirez didn't answer. She didn't need to. Inside the precinct, Reed watched the broadcast from an interview room. His lawyer hovered nearby, whispering strategy. Reed's hands were clenched tight, nails digging into his palms. Marcus's voice on the TV didn't sound like a man begging for justice. It sounded like someone dragging the truth into the light. Reed muttered under his breath, "He's not going to ruin me." But in the reflection of the blank screen after the broadcast cut, his face looked smaller than it ever had. Power had shifted, and he felt it. The city wasn't quiet anymore. By dawn, The video had exploded across every platform. Clips of Officer Keller pinning down an unarmed black man, a man who was later revealed to be General David Cole, had become the face of a growing storm. TV anchors used phrases like public outrage and a boiling point, but those words barely touched the raw fury spreading through the streets. On Jefferson Square, hundreds of people gathered, some clutching handmade signs that read "Justice for David" and "End Police Brutality." More joined with every passing hour. Helicopters hovered overhead, and news vans clogged the corners. The hum of distant sirens merged with the chants that were getting louder. "No, no justice," a young woman's voice cracked through a megaphone. "No peace," the crowd thundered back. Inside his small living room, Malcolm sat on the edge of the couch, watching the footage for what felt like the 100th time. The video showed everything: the brutality, the coldness in Keller's voice, and that single, horrifying moment when David said, "I served this country," and was ignored beside him. Ava scrolled through her phone with trembling hands. Every notification was another explosion. CNN just posted it. BBC Two. "It's everywhere now," she whispered. Malcolm clenched his jaw. "Good, let them all see what they've been ignoring." Ava glanced at him. "You know what this means, right? They'll try to control the story. They'll twist it." "Then we stay louder," Malcolm said. His voice was low but burning. "Louder than their lies." By noon, the protests outside the police headquarters had tripled. Reporters swarmed the barricades, thrusting microphones toward anyone with a sign or a tear in their eye. Officers in riot gear stood stiff along the steps, faces blank, hands tight on their batons. A woman in her 50s stepped forward to the mic. She was Mrs. Ellis, a local activist who had spent decades fighting this system. "This is not just about one man," she shouted, her voice ringing through the square. "This is about every time they told us our pain was an exaggeration. This is about every black man humiliated, every black woman ignored, every voice silenced. No more." The crowd erupted into a roar. Cameras clicked. Drones buzzed overhead. Meanwhile, in a sterile conference room 2 floors above the chaos, Chief of Police Grant Sullivan leaned forward, elbows on the table. His face was pale. Across from him sat Keller, now in plain clothes, his hands fidgeting nervously. "This is getting out of hand," Sullivan muttered. Keller swallowed hard. "Sir, it's just noise. It'll pass." Sullivan slammed his palm on the table, making Keller flinch. "This isn't noise, Keller. It's a hurricane. Do you have any idea who that man was? A 4-star general. 4 stars. This isn't some rookie mistake we can sweep under the rug." Keller tried to speak, but his throat tightened. "I didn't know. That's the problem," Sullivan snapped. "You didn't care to know." The door burst open. A deputy chief rushed in with a tablet in hand. "Sir, the governor just called, and the Pentagon. They want answers." Sullivan exhaled slowly. "Of course they do." Across the city, General David Cole's hospital room was silent, except for the steady beeping of machines. Bandages wrapped his forearms, and bruises marked his skin like storm clouds. He stared at the muted TV above him, the footage of his own assault playing on a loop. His aide, Sergeant Brooks, stood by the door, phone buzzing nonstop. "Sir, there are senators tweeting your name. News channels want interviews. People are marching." David's voice was calm, but beneath it ran a river of rage. "Not because I'm a general," he said softly. "Because I'm a black man they almost crushed." Brooks clenched his fists. Sir David looked up at him, eyes steady. "This isn't just my fight, Brooks. It never was." Night fell, but the protests didn't stop. Floodlights lit the streets, reflecting off banners and determined faces. Police tried to form a perimeter, but the crowd outnumbered them. On the steps of City Hall, Malcolm climbed onto a barricade, the megaphone shaking slightly in his hand. "They want us quiet," he shouted. "They want us afraid, but not this time. Not after what they did to General Cole." The crowd roared. Someone started a chant again, and it rolled like thunder. "Now it's justice. Now it's justice. Now it's peace." "No justice. No peace." Ava squeezed through the crowd to reach him. "Malcolm, there are news crews here from London, Tokyo. Everyone's watching." "Good," Malcolm said. "Let them see everything." Back inside police headquarters, Sullivan stared at a wall of screens showing live coverage of the protests. "They're not backing down," one of his aides whispered. "They shouldn't," Sullivan muttered under his breath. Keller shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I did what I was trained to do," he said weakly. "No," Sullivan said flatly. "You did what you wanted to do." and now the entire country will pay the price for it. For the first time, Keller felt the weight of his actions pressing down like iron. The next morning, the White House press secretary gave a statement. Words like deep concern, independent investigation, and no one is above the law echoed through TV screens nationwide. Stocks dipped, politicians scrambled, sponsors pulled funding from the police foundation, and still, people filled the streets. This wasn't a spark anymore. It was a wildfire. Late that night, David sat upright in his hospital bed. The bruises ached, but his voice was strong. He turned to Brooks. Set up a press conference. Brooks hesitated. Sir, are you sure? You just... David's gaze was like steel. They silenced me on that street. They won't silence me again. Brooks nodded, understanding exactly what this meant. Outside, the chants echoed through the night. In the heart of the city, something had shifted. A system that had always spoken over black voices was, for the first time, being forced to listen. The backlash wasn't just a storm. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The courthouse stood like a fortress stone, solemn, watching. By sunrise, hundreds were already gathered outside the steps, their signs raised like a forest of silent accusations. TV crews lined the sidewalks. Police formed barricades, but the chants rose over them like a storm. Justice for David, accountability now. Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights hummed softly. General David Cole walked down the corridor flanked by Sergeant Brooks and 2 military aides. His posture was straight despite the bruises still visible around his neck. Cameras clicked the moment he entered the hallway. Every flashbulb burned the memory of that night into the nation's eye. Brooks whispered, "They're watching everywhere, sir. Global coverage." David's jaw tightened. "Good, let them see." In courtroom 3B, Officer Keller sat at the defense table, wearing a suit that hung too stiffly on his shoulders. His hands trembled beneath the table. His lawyer leaned in, voice low and sharp. "Don't speak unless I tell you to. They'll eat you alive." Keller stared at the polished wood grain, refusing to look at the man sitting just a few feet away, the man whose breath he had crushed against the pavement. David's presence burned like a mirror Keller couldn't face. The judge entered. All rise. A hush fell like a blanket. The wooden benches creaked as everyone stood. Journalists, activists, law students, veterans, ordinary citizens. Judge Helena Ramos adjusted her glasses, scanning the courtroom like a hawk. "This court is now in session." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Amira Wells, rose first. Her voice was steady, but it carried an iron edge. "This case isn't only about what happened on a sidewalk," she began. "It's about what happens when power forgets humanity, when authority becomes a weapon instead of a shield." She turned toward Keller. "And today, we'll prove that the defendant, Officer Mark Keller, didn't just make a mistake. He made a choice." Keller's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. In the gallery, Malcolm and Ava sat in the front row, hands clenched together. Malcolm's knee bounced with restless energy. Ava whispered, "This is history." "It better be," Malcolm muttered, "because we've bled enough." David sat at the witness stand, uniform crisp, stars glinting beneath the fluorescent light. The silence when he raised his right hand to swear in was heavy enough to crush lungs. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," David said. Amira stepped forward. "General Cole, can you describe what happened on the night of June 8th? David's voice didn't tremble. It cut. "I was walking home from the veterans' dinner. I was in uniform. I heard shouting. Then I saw him, Officer Keller. He pointed at me like I was a threat. No warning, no question. He just advanced." "Did you resist arrest?" Amira asked. David's gaze locked on Keller. "No," I said. "I served this country." He slammed me to the ground. The courtroom exhaled as one inaudible shiver. Keller's lawyer rose. "General Cole, isn't it true you raised your voice at my client?" David's eyes didn't flinch. I raised my hands. The lawyer hesitated, caught in the precision of his answer. "Isn't it also true that it was dark, and Officer Keller couldn't have known?" David cut him off, voice low. "I was in full dress uniform, 4 stars. I didn't need to be known to be human." Even the judge leaned forward slightly. The lawyer swallowed, realizing the ground beneath him was cracking. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted as news anchors relayed each quote live. Screens in bars, bus stations, and classrooms across the country carried David's testimony like a verdict already written in the air. "Did you hear that?" a young protester said, tears in her eyes. He said, "I didn't need to be known to be human." Chants began again, louder now. carrying his words like an anthem. Back inside, Keller was called to the stand. His palms were slick with sweat. His lawyer whispered one last warning. Keep your story straight. He adjusted his tie and stepped forward. The prosecutor's eyes never left him. Officer Keller, Amira began, when you saw the victim, what made you decide to treat him as a threat? Keller's throat worked. He matched the description. Amira took a single step closer. What description? Keller froze. A tall black man in a dark jacket. The courtroom stilled. She let the silence sit, thick and condemning. So, in your eyes, that was enough, Amira said quietly. A description, vague enough to fit thousands of people in this city. And yet you decided to pin this man, a decorated four-star general, to the ground. Keller's breathing turned shallow. David watched, unmoving. It wasn't triumph he felt. It was exhaustion. This wasn't new. This was centuries old. Amira's voice rose, cutting through the still air. This isn't just about a single night. This is about a system that told Officer Keller he could do this without consequence. And for the first time, that system is being forced to answer. Judge Ramos leaned forward. The court will take a short recess. The gavel struck once. Cameras flashed. The crowd outside roared louder. As David stood, Brooks moved to help him, but he waved him off. He walked out of the courtroom into the blinding sunlight. The chants outside were deafening now. Malcolm pushed through the crowd, face shining with both fury and hope. David, he shouted, you broke the silence. Man, you did it. David shook his head. No, we did. Reporters surged toward him, microphones raised like weapons of a different kind. A single sentence he spoke would shape the night's headlines. He knew that. He looked straight into the cameras. They tried to bury me under that street, David said, voice steady as a drumbeat, but the truth was louder. The crowd exploded. In a corner of the courthouse hallway, Keller sat alone, the weight of the crowd's voice pressing through the walls. For the first time, the badge didn't make him untouchable, and for the first time in years, the system around him trembled. The morning of the verdict was heavier than any before. The courthouse loomed like an ancient beast, its cold stone walls swallowing the sound of hundreds waiting outside. Reporters were already broadcasting live, their voices clipped and urgent. Every headline carried one name, David Cole. Every eye was fixed on courtroom 3B. Inside, a hush clung to the air. Every seat was filled, activists, veterans, students, journalists, even off-duty officers. The only sound came from the soft creak of the wooden benches. David sat at the front, posture unyielding. His uniform was immaculate, but the bruise at the edge of his collar remained like a silent witness. Beside him, Brooks adjusted his tie nervously. Malcolm and Ava sat 2 rows behind. Ava clutched Malcolm's hand so tight her knuckles whitened. Malcolm's eyes never left the defense table, where Keller sat rigid, pale, his jaw clenched like a man waiting to be swallowed by his own silence. The bailiff's voice echoed through the room. All rise for the jury. 12 men and women entered. Their faces were unreadable, carved from the pressure of history and scrutiny. As they filed into their seats, the weight of every protest sign, every news broadcast, every whispered conversation across the country seemed to press down on them. Judge Ramos gave a single nod. You may be seated. The jury foreperson stood. A folded piece of paper trembled slightly in their hand. Your Honor, they said, voice taut, we have reached a verdict. David's heartbeat slowed to a single heavy rhythm. Keller shifted, fingers digging into his thighs beneath the table. His lawyer whispered something he didn't fully hear. Judge Ramos took the paper, unfolded it, read in silence. No one breathed. Then she handed it back. Foreperson, please read the verdict. The voice came steady, but it landed like thunder. On the charge of aggravated assault under color of authority, guilty. A single gasp rippled through the courtroom. The foreperson continued. On the charge of violation of civil rights, guilty. Keller's head jerked slightly, as if struck. His lawyer lowered his gaze. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted as the words hit the airwaves. Reporters shouted into their mics. Chants surged upward, louder than sirens. Justice has a name, David Cole. Malcolm gripped the bench and let out a sharp breath, eyes shining. Ava buried her face in his shoulder, whispering, finally. Inside, Keller stared blankly at the floor. The weight of the verdict pressed on his chest like lead. For the first time, his badge meant nothing. No shield, no escape. Just the cold reality of accountability. Amira Wells rose slowly, turning toward the gallery. Her voice was firm. This verdict isn't just about one man, she said. It's about a system that believed it could act without consequence. Today, that belief broke. The judge's gavel struck once. Officer Keller will be remanded into custody pending sentencing. Court is adjourned. The sound of the gavel wasn't just a legal conclusion. It was a fracture in the wall that had held back justice for too long. Reporters swarmed the steps of the courthouse like a tide. Cameras flashed. Microphones extended in every direction. David stepped out into the light. The crowd's roar hit him like a wave. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't smile. He just walked, slow and steady, through a sea of faces that had carried him here. A protester shouted his name. Another held up a sign that read, "Your voice broke the silence." Malcolm pushed through the crowd, breathless. David stopped. Malcolm's eyes were wet. "You did it, man. You showed them we're not invisible." David shook his head slowly. "No, we showed them." Ava joined them, her voice quiet. "It doesn't fix everything." David looked out over the sea of people, their voices rising into the cold air like smoke. "No," he said softly, "but it cracks the wall." Far from the courthouse, in a quiet holding cell, Keller sat on a steel bench staring at the white wall. The noise of the crowd was faint here. A distant rumble dot his hands, once so quick to command, now shook. He whispered into the empty room, "I thought the badge would save me, but it didn't." For the first time, the system that had always turned away had turned toward him. Night fell. The crowd outside grew instead of fading. Candles flickered in hands. Names of the forgotten men and women who never got their day in court were spoken aloud. David stood at the edge of the steps, watching the vigil. A reporter asked, "General Cole, what does this verdict mean to you?" David didn't give them a headline. He gave them the truth. "It means justice spoke today," he said. "But justice is not the end. It's the beginning." He walked down into the crowd, not as a symbol, as a man. The chants rose again, steady, unshaken, alive. The system had been forced to listen, and it would never again pretend not to hear. The courtroom had emptied hours ago, but the city hadn't gone quiet. It never does after a storm like this. Outside the courthouse, the chants had turned into candlelight vigils. The signs that once roared now whispered in flame. "Justice for David" was written across banners, glowing faintly in the night wind. David Cole stood at the window of his hospital room, still in uniform, his body healing but his mind far from still. The bruise around his neck was fading, but the memory of Keller's knee, the pressure of the pavement, and the cold absence of humanity in that moment that would not fade. Doc Brooks entered softly, holding a tablet. "Sir," he said, voice low, "you're trending in 47 countries. The president just called you a symbol of strength." David didn't turn around. "I'm not a symbol," he said flatly. "I'm a man who almost died on a sidewalk." Brooks hesitated. "The world doesn't see it like that." "That's the problem," David muttered. "They see the victory. They don't see the scar." In the city, the ripple effects had already begun. Officer Keller's guilty verdict had sparked an internal storm. Dozens of cases were being reopened. Officers whispered in hallways. Commanders called emergency meetings. The police union issued a statement about due process. But their words sounded hollow against the sound of thousands marching through the streets. Mrs. Ellis, the veteran activist, stood at a rally that same night. Her voice, though raspy with age, cut through the night like glass. "One verdict doesn't end a disease," she told the crowd. "It only proves the fever's real." A chant rose behind her, not as loud as before, but steadier, more rooted. Back in the hospital, Malcolm and Ava sat at David's bedside. The TV played news footage of the verdict on a loop. Reporters debated politics, policy, public opinion. David's name was everywhere. "You're a hero now," Ava said quietly. David shook his head slowly. "Heroes don't get dragged face down on concrete." Malcolm leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But you forced the world to look." David finally looked at him. "And what happens when they look away again?" Malcolm's throat tightened. "Then we keep shouting." The cost of justice had teeth. Malcolm's father had been fired from the factory after appearing at one of the protests. Ava's younger brother, who filmed the original video, had started receiving threats, anonymous messages, vague warnings, a brick through their front window the night after the verdict. David clenched his fists when he heard, "They're still trying to silence the truth." Ava's voice shook. "Yeah, but we're not the same people they tried to silence a month ago." Meanwhile, Keller sat alone in a gray holding cell awaiting sentencing. The sound of a leaking pipe echoed through the walls. No badge, no power, just a man alone with the choices he'd made. His lawyer's visit that morning had been short and blunt. "They're making an example of you," the lawyer had said. Keller stared at the floor. "I thought I was the example." "You are," the lawyer replied, "but not the way you wanted." For the first time, Keller felt something he had never allowed himself before, the full, uncloaked weight of what he'd done. At the military base, the Pentagon had offered David a promotion and a National Medal of Honor. Cameras, speeches, a clean, polished headline. He refused. "I don't want my pain wrapped in ceremony," he told the press secretary who came in person. "You want to honor me? Fix the system that put me under his knee." Her practiced smile faltered. Days later, in a packed auditorium, David finally spoke publicly, not as a general, but as a man. Cameras rolled. The crowd sat in complete silence. "I didn't survive that night because the system worked," he began. "I survived, despite it, because someone filmed, because someone shouted, because people refused to look away. This verdict isn't a trophy, it's a mirror, and if you're afraid of what it shows, you should be." The crowd rose to its feet, not in celebration, but in recognition. Mrs. Ellis wept quietly in the front row. After the speech, David stepped outside alone. The air was cold and clean, the city lights flickering like distant stars. He stood on the steps, looking out at the vigil still burning outside the courthouse. Malcolm walked up behind him. "You could have taken the medal," he said. "You could have walked away." David shook his head. "Justice doesn't end with one verdict. It begins with the people who refuse to forget." Ava joined them, slipping her hand into Malcolm's. "And you're one of those people." David looked at them not as followers, not as a symbol, but as equals. "So are you." Far down the street, a mural had been painted overnight. It showed David lying on the pavement but rising from it. Behind him, thousands of faceless figures lifted their fists. No slogan, no logo, just faces that refused to disappear. David stared at it for a long time. A reminder, a warning, a promise. Justice had come, but at a cost. The city would carry the scar. So would he. And both would remember. The night after the verdict was unlike any other. The air carried a strange blend of exhaustion and hope, a fragile, flickering flame in the darkness. The courthouse steps, once flooded with protest signs and shouts, were now nearly empty. Only the faint glow of streetlights cast long shadows over the stone pavement. Inside a quiet cafe across the street, Aaliyah sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The trial had ended. Justice had been spoken. But her heart still burned with something deeper, something that wouldn't let her simply walk away. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Malik. "We're not done. This is just the beginning." She smiled faintly. Malik had always been the fighter, the kind who didn't see victory as an end, but as a spark. The verdict had lit a fire in people's hearts, not just for one case, but for a movement. Moments later, Malik stepped through the cafe door, rain clinging to his jacket. His eyes were tired but alive, ignited with a fire Aaliyah hadn't seen in months. "Did you hear?" he said, sitting across from her. "Hear what?" she asked. "The city council's launching an independent review. People are demanding change. Real change." Aaliyah leaned back, letting his words sink in. For so long, the system had seemed like a giant that could never be moved. But tonight, even if just a little, it had shifted. Outside, a group of young protesters walked past, their voices echoing down the wet street. No justice, no peace. But this time, the chant didn't sound like pain. It sounded like power. Malik reached across the table, taking her hand. "They thought this was about one verdict," he said softly. "But we've started something bigger." Aaliyah met his gaze, feeling the same fire spark inside her chest. She remembered the sleepless nights, the threats, the tears, and yet here they were, still standing, still burning. Suddenly, the cafe door opened again, and Jordan, the defense lawyer who had once doubted whether this fight could be won, stepped in. He wasn't wearing his usual cold expression. He looked changed. "You were right," he said simply, looking at Malik and Aaliyah. "This isn't just about a case. It's about rewriting the story." The three of them shared a look, not of celebration, but of resolve. The road ahead was still dangerous, still uncertain, but something had been born out of the pain. A new movement, a new fight, a new fire. Outside, as dawn began to brush its gold across the horizon, the city felt different. It wasn't healed, it wasn't perfect, but it was awake, and so were they. The sun rose slowly over the city, brushing light across streets, still stained with the memory of sirens and protests. For months, fear had ruled these avenues, but today, it felt different, like the city had taken its first deep breath after a long, suffocating storm. Aaliyah stood on the courthouse steps once more, only this time, there were no reporters shoving microphones in her face. No flashing cameras, no angry mobs, just quiet, peaceful. She looked out at the street below, where fresh murals covered the walls, faces of the fallen, messages of resistance, promises that their names would never be forgotten. Behind her, Malik joined her with a warm cup of coffee in each hand. "You still come here every morning," he said with a smile. Aaliyah accepted the cup. "This place changed everything," she whispered. Malik glanced at the building, the same place where justice had once felt like a dream. "No," he said softly, "we changed everything." In the weeks following the verdict, real change had begun. The City Council passed the Accountability Act, giving communities a voice in policing. Officers who once hid behind badges were now facing public oversight. Protests had transformed into policy, and the whispers of fear had turned into roars of unity. Down the steps, Jordan walked up to them, no longer just a defense lawyer, but now one of the most vocal advocates for systemic reform. His suit was the same, but his purpose was new. "I never thought I'd be part of this," he said, looking around. "But I can't go back to who I was before this trial." Malik clapped him on the back. "None of us can." The three of them stood together, watching as a group of teenagers passed by carrying banners that read, "We are the next chapter. No more silence. Justice lives here." It wasn't just their fight anymore. It belonged to everyone now. Aaliyah felt the wind brush against her face, cool and clean. For so long, she had carried rage like a weight, but now, standing here, she felt something she hadn't in years. Hope, not blind hope, not a fantasy, but something earned, born from pain, forged in fire. "Do you think they'll keep fighting when we're gone?" she asked. Malik turned to her with a quiet, unwavering certainty. "They already are." The city clock struck 8 a.m. A new day had begun. Aaliyah took Malik's hand, Jordan walked beside them, and together, they stepped down from the courthouse, not as victims, not even as heroes, but as witnesses to the birth of something bigger than themselves. The storm had passed, but the fire would never die.